Mengal, dear participants of the conference, ladies and gentlemen. I want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to present some aspects about the CPEC core unit of China's BRI, which has implications especially for Europe, to present by me now. CPEC, as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, has three objectives for China. First, the economic investment in Pakistan, and especially with regard to Gwadar and Balochistan, aims for a world domination over the seas to the African continent through the Suez Canal to Europe, whereby the acquired ports in Europe can quickly become military bases. The nearly Strait of Hormuz can be set in motion at any time as a means of extortion against states, as so much percent of the oil trade passes through there. Second, China knows the saying, who dominates Europe rules the world. Third, China is massively arming, is not bound by any treaty, and is taking advantage of the Western-imposed Cold War tension with Russia to expand its spider web around the world through its immense investments. My advice to the EU: to combine economically with Russia, because of Cold War strategies that have put Europe into the position to have no capital countermeasure to effectively build Eastern Europe up. The Chinese are now taking it over and politically dividing Europe. In Germany, China is trying to buy the key industry. My warnings as a think tank through the experiences with CPEC were presented by the previous Foreign Minister Gabriel at the International Security Conference in Munich. Both nationally and via the EU, urgent action is needed to halt this development. But it seems that it is already too late for that, because China is already splitting Europe through Hungary and Greece. Chinese state companies have been able to buy 100% German companies, while German companies may only acquire 50% stake. The appointment of a supervisor who ensures that only 10% of shares in German companies may be acquired comes quite late. Technology theft, hacker attacks are further alarming signs that the storm on Europe has begun politically and soon to be the longest in military terms. In this context, I would like to mention the 3-day imprisonment of respected Munir Mengal in Piraeus, who is being silenced because of a libel on the part of China that he is a dangerous man, critics of Chinese projects, and that this undermines democracy and human rights. In Pakistan, CPEC is causing significant human rights violations. These are detailed here by the other conference participants. Concentration camps at Kashgar for Uyghurs, human rights violations at Tibet. If states are depending on China, any critic about Chinese politics stops. Through the trap of indebtedness, China secures entire regions that are economically and politically dependent on them. This colonization of the economy will enable China's world domination. The purchase of European ports has already created a dangerous scenario for a military takeover by an easy-to-build military base in them. Europe is practically surrounded. The port of Gwadar in Balochistan, leased by China for 40 years, is a starting point, enabling China to extend its hands to Africa and Europe on a permanent basis. I'm presenting now you details and facts about my thesis. Two trade routes emerged to better connect China with other countries, once over land, once by sea. The routes pass through more than 60 countries in Asia, Europe and Africa. Equally enormous are the costs for the necessary infrastructure. The equivalent of $1,000 billion should be invested in the construction of roads, ports and power plants. This is largely funded through the Chinese government's own Silk Road Fund and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, a multilateral development bank founded in 2014 at the initiative of China, currently with 61 member countries. Above all, the Europeans complain that their companies hardly get their hands on orders for infrastructure construction, because China often makes its loan commitments on the condition that Chinese companies in construction projects won the contract. These companies should then employ Chinese as well, and as far as possible buy Chinese components and raw materials, says Thomas Eder of the Berlin-based Mercator Institute for Chinese Studies. The result, in the Asian and African countries of the New Silk Road, the share of Europeans in trade and investment is falling, according also to Eder about the Silk Roads. Dependence on over-indebtedness. Another point of criticism concerns the poorer countries which are expanding their infrastructure with Chinese help. They would be heavily in debt for the construction projects and just economically dependent, according to a study by the Center for Global Development, an American think tank based in Washington, D.C. 8 countries are therefore particularly vulnerable. In Asia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Laos and the Maldives. In Europe, Montenegro. In Africa, Djibouti. Since these countries participated in the New Silk Road, their public debt has been risen sharply, and China holds much of the debt, the study said. Example, Pakistan. The Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor is considered a showpiece of the New Silk Road. It encompasses 3,000-kilometer networks of roads, railways, gas pipelines and power plants that stretches from western China to the Pakistani coastline and finishes in the newly built deep water port of Gwadar. The Center for Global Development estimates the total investment volume at about $62 billion. About 80% of the money should come from China, and China requires about 5% interest. Major projects such as this in some Asian countries, but especially in Pakistan, may exacerbate any existing governance issues, especially in economic liability and corruption. Of course, both sides hope for benefits from the project. For China, the economic corridor is linked to Arab oil wells and also to the African continent, where China is very active. Pakistan hopes for economic recovery and many new jobs. However, if the Pakistani economy turns out to be worse off than planned, the country would be in trouble because of the increased debt. The consequences of this can be seen in the case of Sri Lanka. After the country could not longer service its debt, China offered him a debt relief. In return, the Silk Road port of Hambantota was leased for 99 years to a Chinese state-owned company. New trade routes, development of infrastructure in underdeveloped countries, secured financing. China's leadership is promoting the major project as a classic win-in-win situation for all involved. But there is also criticism. Above all, the Europeans complain that their companies hardly get their hands on orders for infrastructure construction, because China often makes its loan commitments on the condition that Chinese companies in construction projects won the contract. These companies should then employ Chinese as well, and as far as possible buy Chinese components and raw materials, as I pointed out. The Chinese-Pakistan economic major projects such as this in some Asian countries, but especially in Pakistan. China uses the Silk Roads to establish its world power. The Silk Roads are new arterial roads for China powerhouse aspirations. The port of Duisburg, Europe's largest inland port, is also connected by rail to the new Silk Road. Although Brussels has been watching the goings on for years with suspicion, it has at best reacted cautiously. After all, China is an important trading partner. While China acted, Europe initially set up a working group to develop a new strategy for Central Asia by the end of 2019. Above all, China's attempt to tie Eastern Europe closer to itself through the 16+1 cooperation raises concerns that European unity may be further weakened. 60+1 is intended to improve China's economic relations with 16 countries in Central and Eastern Europe and tap into investment opportunities there. Beijing secures political influence with billions of investments and creates potential naval bases. 2 of China's state-owned companies are currently buying ports around the world, including in Europe. Thanks to cheap money, they can outrank competitors and take losses in strategically well-located locations. The control of the oceans by sea trade and domination means superiority in the world, because nothing facilitates the exchange as the sea does. However, large-scale investments not only have a political dimension but also military potential in the case of ports. There's an inherent duality in the port facilities that China builds abroad. These are superficially commercial but can be rapidly expanded to serve military missions. At the end of January, COSCO also gained a foothold in Northern Europe and took over a container terminal in the port of the Belgian town of Zeebrugge. The Chinese state-owned company operates ports worldwide and one of the largest merchant fleets in the world. The Chinese ambassador in Belgium, Ku Xing, praised the takeover. The port of Zeebrugge is far-sighted about entering into a partnership with China. This means that Zeebrugge is no longer alone in Europe. COSCO has also interest in the ports of Piraeus, Valencia and Bilbao, Spain, or Vado, Italy. In addition, there are at least 7 European ports in which China merchants holding is involved. Together, the 2 state-owned companies now control 10% of the capacity of all European container terminals, 10 times more than at the beginning of the decade. In the whole, we have this resume that Gwadar port is the starting point of Chinese planned conquering on Europe and Africa, not only by economic means. We Europeans should have an interest to interfere also in Gwadar and Balochistan. I thank you for your esteemed attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.